One neighbor knocked on the door asking for sugar and ended up sweetening the life of a lonely father. What started as a simple favor turned into a connection that would change their lives forever. A story of new beginnings and unexpected love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The fine drizzle of April in Brooklyn created a translucent curtain over the narrow streets of the neighborhood, where row houses lined up like tired soldiers after decades resisting the rampant growth of New York. The melancholic sound of raindrops hitting the red ceramic roof mixed with the distant noise of traffic on Fifth Avenue, creating an urban symphony that Mark knew by heart after 5 years living there. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday morning when he finally managed to get Isabella, 14 years old, out of bed to get ready for school. The teenager had developed an Olympic resistance to mornings since turning 14, as if each awakening was a personal affront to the universe. Across the narrow hallway, Peter, only 6 years old, had been awake for an hour quietly playing in his room with his toy fire trucks, religiously respecting the father's rule of not making noise before 7. "Dad, there's no more milk!" Isabella shouted from the kitchen, her voice carrying that tone of morning irritation that had become her trademark. And Peter spilled juice on his school shirt again. Mark sighed deeply, running his hands through his brown hair, which was starting to show some gray at the temples. At 42, he had become a master at handling multiple domestic crises simultaneously, a skill he never imagined he would need to develop when he married 15 years ago. Sarah's departure, 2 years earlier, had turned his life into an endless sequence of military logistics, school schedules, clean uniforms, homework, medical appointments, parent-teacher meetings, all multiplied by 2 and executed by one person. "Issa, grab Peter's spare shirt from the hallway closet," he replied, mentally checking off his to-do list for the day. "And use condensed milk with water for the cereal. That will do for today." The 2-story house with its cozy small rooms reflected Mark's meticulously organized personality. Every object had its specific place. Keys always in the same kitchen drawer, medications in a weekly organizer on the counter, the children's backpacks hanging on specific hooks at the entrance. This obsessive organization was his way of maintaining control over a life that often threatened to slip through his fingers. The strong aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen air, mixing with the smell of toasted bagels and the soft scent of fabric softener that still clung to the freshly ironed school shirts. Mark had developed a morning routine timed to the minute. 6 o'clock wake up, 6:15 start the coffee, 6:30 wake the kids, 7 o'clock breakfast, 7:40 leave for school. Any deviation from this schedule caused a domino effect that could compromise the entire day. "Dad, Isabella's taking too long in the bathroom again," complained Peter, appearing in the kitchen with a clean shirt already on, but a worried expression on his round little face. "We're going to be late." "Calm down, champ," Mark replied, bending down to meet his son's green eyes, a trait Peter had inherited from his absent mother. "We still have time. How about you put away your trucks while I finish preparing the lunchbox?" Peter nodded vigorously, running back to his room with the typical determination of a 6-year-old on a mission. Mark involuntarily smiled, watching how his youngest son had adapted to the new family routine with a resilience that sometimes surprised him. Unlike Isabella, who expressed her outrage through tantrums and prolonged silences, Peter had embraced the changes with almost unshakable optimism. As he prepared the sandwiches for lunch, turkey and cheese for Isabella, who had developed sophisticated tastes, and peanut butter and jelly for Peter, who maintained simpler preferences, Mark reflected on how his life had completely transformed. Before the separation, he was just the dad who came home after work for dinner and to help with homework. Now, he was a chef, driver, psychologist, nurse, event planner, conflict negotiator, and still needed to keep his financial consulting business running. The rain had intensified, creating small puddles in the backyard where he used to hang clothes on sunny days. The tiny garden, with its hardy plants chosen more for practicality than beauty, took on a melancholic aspect under the New York drizzle. It was on mornings like this that Mark felt the weight of loneliness most intensely, even surrounded by the constant hustle of solo parenting. "Ready, Dad," Peter announced, returning to the kitchen with his toy trucks neatly packed in his school backpack. "Can I have coffee now?" "Of course. Sit down while I serve," Mark replied, feeling that familiar tightness in his chest as he saw how hard his son was trying to be the easiest boy possible. Peter never complained, never threw tantrums, as if he instinctively understood that his father already had enough responsibilities. It was then that the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the small house, cutting through the established morning routine like a dissonant note in a familiar melody. Mark furrowed his brow, checking the clock on the kitchen wall. 7:53. Who would ring? The doorbell during school hours on a rainy Tuesday morning. "Stay here and have your coffee, Peter. I'll see who it is," he said, drying his hands on a dish towel before walking down the narrow hallway to the front door. When he opened the door, his breath literally stopped for a moment. Before him stood a woman who seemed to have stepped out. In a New York urban dream, her reddish-brown hair, dampened by the light drizzle, framed a face with delicate yet striking features, slightly tanned skin, large honey-colored eyes that seemed to hold interesting secrets, and, naturally, rosy lips that curved into a shy but genuine smile. She wore a light blue cotton blouse that stood out against her skin, dark jeans and white sneakers that showed signs of regular use. In her delicate hands, she held an empty white ceramic mug. "Hi," she said, her voice having a musical quality that immediately caught his attention. "Sorry to bother you on a school morning, but do you happen to have some sugar? I just moved into the house next door and I'm still getting organized with groceries." Mark was silent for a few seconds, not so much because of her beauty, but because of the natural way she spoke to him, as if they had been neighbors for years. In New York, especially in Brooklyn, neighbors rarely knew each other beyond polite greetings in the elevator or on the street. "Sure," he finally managed to respond, opening the door wider. "Come in, please, it's raining." "Oh, no need, I can wait here." "Come in, you'll get soaked," Mark insisted, making space for her to pass. She hesitated for a second, then stepped inside, bringing with her a subtle scent of vanilla and something floral that he couldn't quite identify. The hallway of the house, which had always seemed narrow to him, suddenly felt even smaller with her presence. "I'm Mark," he said, extending his hand. "Ellen," she replied, shaking it briefly. Her skin was soft and a little cold from the rain. "Dad, who is it?" Peter appeared at the kitchen entrance, curious like any 6-year-old. "This is our new neighbor, Peter. She needs a bit of sugar." Ellen crouched down to Peter's height, smiling with a naturalness that made the boy immediately reciprocate. "Hi, Peter. What a lovely name. Are you having breakfast?" "I am." "Do you want some too?" "My dad makes really good coffee," Peter offered with the unguarded hospitality of children. Ellen laughed, a genuine laugh that echoed through the house like music. "Thank you, Peter, but I don't want to interrupt you. I imagine you have to hurry for school." "You're not interrupting at all," Mark heard himself saying, surprising himself. "Would you like a quick coffee while I grab the sugar?" She hesitated again, looking from Mark to Peter, as if assessing whether accepting would be appropriate. "If it's not too much trouble." "Dad, where's Isabella?" Peter suddenly remembered his sister. As if summoned, Isabella appeared in the hallway, her hair still damp from the shower and a curious expression on her face. At 14, she had developed a special radar for situations outside the routine, especially when they involved women talking to her dad. "Isabella, this is Ellen, our new neighbor," Mark introduced. Isabella greeted politely, but Mark noticed that analytical look she reserved for any woman who entered their lives. Since the separation, Isabella had become a fierce guardian of family stability, suspicious of any change that might represent more emotional turbulence. In the kitchen, while Mark prepared a cup of coffee for Ellen and poured sugar into a small bowl, she chatted naturally with the children about school, asking about their favorite subjects and genuinely listening to their answers. There was nothing forced in her interaction with them, no exaggerated attempts to win them over or impress their dad. "Have you lived here long?" she asked, accepting the cup of coffee and inhaling the aroma appreciatively. "5 years, Mark replied, sitting down at the small table. "We bought the house after Peter was born. And you, where are you coming from?" "From the countryside," she answered, vaguely stirring her coffee. "I needed a fresh start in the city." There was something in the way she said that which suggested a more complex story, but Mark didn't press. Everyone in New York had their reasons for starting over, and he respected that. "Dad, it's 8:05, Peter announced, looking at the kitchen clock with the precision of an executive. "That's true, we have to go," Mark said, standing up. "Ellen, take the sugar. If you need anything—" "Thank you," she said, standing up as well, "and I'm really sorry for interrupting your routine." "You didn't interrupt anything," Mark replied, and he realized he truly felt that way. As the children grabbed their backpacks and he put on his coat, Ellen headed for the door. On the threshold, she turned one last time. "Mark, thank you so much, really." There was something in her voice that suggested she was grateful for more than just the sugar. After she left, the house felt strangely quiet, despite the usual hustle and bustle of getting ready for school. Mark found himself thinking about how she had laughed at Peter's silly joke, how she had listened attentively to Isabella's complaints about the math teacher, how she had held the coffee cup with both hands, as if savoring not just the drink, but the moment of warmth and welcome. "Dad, she's pretty," Peter commented innocently as he put on his backpack. "Yeah," Mark agreed without thinking, then realized what he had said. Isabella looked at him with an unreadable expression, but said nothing. During the drive to school, as he navigated the wet streets of Brooklyn, Mark found himself reflecting on those unexpected 15 minutes that had broken his morning routine. He couldn't remember the last time a conversation with a stranger had flowed so naturally, or when his kitchen had felt so welcoming with someone new's presence. It was just a neighbor asking for sugar, he told himself. A perfectly ordinary situation. But as the children got out at the school entrance and he headed to the office, he couldn't shake from his mind Ellen's shy smile, nor how her laughter had filled the empty spaces of his home. The following Friday, Mark was organizing the groceries. It was a rainy afternoon in the kitchen when he heard the doorbell ring again. This time it was 4:30 in the afternoon, a time when the kids had already returned from school, and he was working from home, taking advantage of the relative tranquility to review financial reports for his clients. "I'll get it!" shouted Peter, running down the hallway with the pent-up energy of an entire afternoon of homework. "Hold on, Peter. Let me see who it is first." Mark intercepted him, still with a pen in hand and reading glasses hanging from his neck. When he opened the door, he found Ellen again, but this time she was holding a tray covered with a colorful dish towel. The aroma emanating from the tray was irresistible. Chocolate, sweetened condensed milk, and something else that made his mouth water instantly. "Hi," she said with that same shy smile from the first time. "I brought a little something as a thank you for the sugar last time." "Ellen, did you make chocolate truffles?" Peter appeared beside Mark, his eyes shining like two headlights in the dark. "I did," she laughed. "I thought you might like them. They're homemade, with dark chocolate and sweetened condensed milk. Recipe from my grandmother. Mark noticed the slight hesitation but didn't comment. Instead, he opened the door wider. "Come in, please. The kids are going to go crazy for homemade chocolate truffles." "I don't want to impose again." "Ellen," Mark said, with a gentle firmness that surprised her. "You're bringing chocolate truffles for 2 kids on a Friday afternoon. If that's imposing, please impose on us more often." She laughed that musical laugh that was already becoming familiar to him and stepped inside. In the kitchen, Isabella was doing her math homework at the table, surrounded by books and notebooks. When she saw Ellen, her face lit up genuinely for the first time since her parents' separation. "Hi, Ellen. What's that wonderful smell?" "Homemade chocolate truffles," Ellen replied, uncovering the tray. "I thought you deserved something special for the weekend." The chocolate truffles were perfect. Small, uniform balls covered with colorful sprinkles arranged in carefully chosen paper cups. They weren't the store-bought truffles that Mark occasionally bought at the market, but sweets clearly made with time, care, and quality ingredients. "Can I eat one now, Dad?" Peter asked, practically bouncing with excitement. "After dinner, champ." "Oh, let him have a taste," Ellen gently intervened. "A truffle before dinner is sometimes necessary for the soul." Mark looked at her, surprised. The phrase sounded like something an experienced mother would say, not a casual observation from a neighbor. "Do you have kids?" he asked as Peter carefully nibbled on his truffle as if it were a rare treasure. "I have a daughter," Ellen replied, and again there was that subtle hesitation. "She's at a friend's house today." "How old?" Isabella asked, lifting her eyes from her math homework. 8 years old, Emily." "Wow, Peter is going to have a little friend," Isabella commented, smiling at her brother, who was already on his second truffle. "Isa, that's not what—" "Ellen said," Mark gently warned, but Ellen shook her head. "No, it's fine. It would be nice for the kids to meet. Emily has been a bit shy since the move. I think it would do her good to have new friends in the neighborhood." Mark served coffee to Ellen, watching how she moved naturally around the kitchen, helping to organize Isabella's books to make space on the table, complimenting the firefighter drawing Peter had made at school. There was an ease in her gestures that suggested genuine familiarity with children, not the rehearsed behavior some women displayed when trying to impress single dads. "What do you do for a living, Ellen?" Isabella asked with the direct curiosity of teenagers. "I'm reorganizing professionally," Ellen replied, stirring her coffee. "Moving cities sometimes means changing careers too." "I understand," Mark said, and he really did. He himself had needed to completely restructure his business after the separation, when he found out he could no longer travel constantly to serve clients from other cities. "And you? What do you do?" she asked. "Financial consulting for small and medium-sized businesses. I help entrepreneurs organize their finances, plan investments, those kinds of things." "That must be interesting. I've always admired people who can make sense of numbers." "Dad is really smart," Peter declared proudly, licking chocolate from his fingers. "He knows hard math and helps people not lose money." Ellen smiled at Peter, then looked at Mark with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. There was respect there and maybe something more. "It's an important profession," she said, "especially in a country like the United States, where so many people struggle with financial education." The observation was insightful and showed that she understood the economic complexities of the country. Mark found himself curious about her background, where she came from, what kind of education she had received, what her real story was. "Ellen, would you like to have dinner with us?" Peter suddenly asked, with the disarming hospitality that characterized his social interactions. "Dad always makes too much food anyway." "Peter," Mark began, embarrassed by his son's lack of filter. "No, it's fine," Ellen quickly said. "That's very kind, Peter, but I don't want to impose on your hospitality." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Mark heard himself say, surprising himself again. I really always make food for a small army. And it would be a good opportunity for you to meet Emily. Ellen hesitated, looking from one child to the other, then to Mark. She really is just visiting a friend. I can pick her up. Then it's settled, Isabella announced, with the determination of a teenager who had just solved a particularly difficult math problem. Dinner at 7? If you're sure it's not a bother. Ellen, Mark said, getting up to start dinner preparations, stop apologizing. We're neighbors. That's what neighbors do. She smiled, not the shy smile from previous encounters, but something more open and genuine. Okay, I'll go. Get Emily and we'll be back by 7. After she left, the house immediately became more lively. Peter started to tidy up his toys for the visit, while Isabella decided to change her outfit, because first impressions matter. Mark found himself checking if he had enough ingredients to make a decent dinner for 5 people, mentally reorganizing the instant noodle menu into something more presentable. It was 6:15 when he decided to make his specialty, a mushroom risotto he had learned to prepare by watching cooking shows during the lonely early months after the separation. It was one of the few dishes he could confidently prepare, and that always impressed guests. As he sautéed the mushrooms in olive oil, letting the toasted aroma fill the kitchen, Mark reflected on how different the last few days had been. There was an anticipation in the air that he hadn't felt in a long time, not just the expectation of a visit, but something more subtle and comforting. Dad, the house smells like a restaurant, Peter commented, appearing in the kitchen already showered and wearing his Avengers t-shirt. It's the golden mushrooms in olive oil, Mark explained, stirring the arborio rice. The secret is not to rush. Each grain needs to absorb the broth slowly. Isabella appeared a few minutes later, wearing a blue top that accentuated her green eyes, and with her hair down in a way that made her look older. I'm nervous, she confessed, sitting at the table. What if Emily doesn't like us? What if it's awkward? Isa, relax, Mark said, adding another ladle of warm broth to the risotto. You're great with younger kids. Remember how well you took care of Peter when he was little? That's true, Peter agreed. Isa has always been the best, big sister in the world. Isabella smiled, a bit of her nervousness dissipating. At exactly 7 o'clock, Mark noted that Ellen was punctual. The doorbell rang again. This time, when he opened the door, he found Ellen accompanied by a girl who was clearly her daughter. Emily had dark brown hair tied in 2 braids, big, curious eyes like her mother's, and wore a sea-green dress that contrasted beautifully with her tanned skin. In her hands, she held a storybook and a small teddy bear. Hi, she said shyly, half hidden behind her mother's skirt. Hi, Emily, Mark replied, bending down to her height. I'm Mark. Ellen has told me a lot about you. She talked about us too, Emily responded, her voice soft but clear. Peter came running in, then stopped abruptly upon seeing the new girl, suddenly shy as well. Hi, he said, waving. Hi, she replied, waving back. Isabella, instinctively taking on the role of the diplomatic big sister, approached with a warm smile. Emily, what a beautiful dress. Does your teddy bear have a name? Thank you. His name is Bruno, Emily replied, visibly relaxing. My mom said you guys are really nice. During dinner, while the aroma of the creamy risotto filled the small but cozy kitchen, conversations flowed naturally. Emily, after overcoming her initial shyness, revealed herself to be an intelligent and observant girl, asking questions about the neighborhood school, interesting places to visit in New York, and Isabella's favorite books. Ellen ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting the risotto in a way that didn't seem like polite courtesy, but real pleasure. Where did you learn to cook like this? She asked. YouTube and necessity, Mark replied, laughing. When you suddenly become a single dad, you either learn to cook properly or the kids. We'll live on pizza and ramen." "Dad burned a lot of food at first," Peter added, with the brutal honesty of children. "One time the pasta turned black like charcoal." Everyone laughed, including Mark. "I still burn things sometimes," he admitted. "But Peter is now my official assistant. He lets me know when something smells different." "I can cook too," Emily said shyly. "My mom taught me how to make pancakes and chocolate truffles." "That's true," Ellen confirmed, affectionately running her hand through her daughter's hair. "She's my assistant in the kitchen." There was something touching in the way mother and daughter looked at each other, a complicity that spoke of much time spent together, a partnership forged by circumstances Mark still didn't fully understand. After dinner, while the kids settled in the living room to watch a movie, Ellen insisted on helping with the dishes. In the kitchen, working side by side at the small sink, she and Mark spoke softly about everyday things. The best schools in the neighborhood, the cheapest markets, the bakeries that made decent bagels. "Thank you for today," Ellen said while drying a dish. Emily was needing this. A family environment, kids. Her age, it's been hard for her to adapt. "Change is always complicated for kids," Mark observed. "Peter took months to get used to it when we moved here." "It wasn't just the move to a new city," Ellen said quietly, glancing toward the living room where the three kids were laughing at some joke from the movie. "It was the whole situation. Sometimes she asks why we had to leave so quickly, why we couldn't bring more things, why—" She stopped, as if realizing she was revealing more than she intended. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to unload my problems on you." "You're not unloading anything," Mark said gently. "We all have our burdens to carry, and sometimes it helps to talk to someone who understands." She looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude and something like relief. "You really understand, don't you? This thing about starting over, building a new life for the kids." "I do," he confirmed. "Every day is a small act of faith that things will work out." When they finally left around 9:30 after Emily exchanged phone numbers with Isabella and promised to play with Peter over the weekend, the house felt strangely quiet again. "I liked her," Isabella declared while brushing her teeth, "and Emily is pretty mature for her age. I think they will be nice friends to Peter." "And for you?" Mark asked. "For me too. It's been a while since I talked to an adult who really paid attention to what I was saying." Later, after putting Peter to bed, Mark found himself at the kitchen window, looking at the house next door, where a soft light glowed in what must have been the living room. He thought of Ellen washing dishes, helping Emily with a bath, reading, a bedtime story, the same domestic rituals he performed every night, but somehow felt less lonely knowing that someone nearby was living a similar routine. It was just a neighbor, he repeated to himself, a single mother trying to restart her life, just like he had done. But as he prepared coffee for the next day and checked if the kids' backpacks were ready, he couldn't shake off how Ellen had laughed at Peter's stories, how she had patiently listened to Isabella's teenage worries, how she moved around her kitchen with a naturalness that made the house feel cozier. And most importantly, he couldn't forget the genuine look of gratitude in her eyes when she said Emily needed a family environment. Maybe, he thought as he turned off the lights, they both needed that. 3 weeks after dinner, New York was hit by one of those typical autumn storms that turned the city into an aquatic chaos. It was a Thursday night when the winds began to howl between the buildings of Brooklyn, making the windows tremble and the trees sway dangerously. By 9 o'clock, the electricity flickered like a candle about to go out. Mark was finishing up, reviewing reports on the computer when he heard Peter coughing in his room. It wasn't the dry cough from the air conditioning, but something deeper and more concerning that set off all his parental alarms. "Peter," he called, walking down the dark hallway, lit only by the lightning cutting through the sky outside the windows. "Dad!" The boy's voice sounded weak and congested. "I have a sore throat." Mark turned on the bedroom light and immediately saw that Peter was pale, with flushed cheeks from fever and eyes too bright. When he placed his hand on his son's forehead, he felt the unmistakable heat of a high fever. "Damn," he murmured softly, then corrected himself. "Sorry, champ. Let's check that fever." The thermometer confirmed his suspicions. 39 degrees and rising. Peter had developed an infection that needed immediate medical attention, but the nearest children's hospital was 20 minutes away on a normal night. With the storm and possible flooding, it could take an hour. "Isabella!" he called for his daughter, trying to keep calm in his voice. Isabella appeared in the doorway, still wearing the flannel pajama with a unicorn print that she insisted was ironic. "What happened?" "Peter has a high fever. I need to take him to the hospital, but I can't leave you alone with this storm." Isabella, who at 14 had inherited her father's ability to solve problems in crisis moments, immediately took charge. "Call Grandma Teresa," she suggested, referring to Mark's mother, who lived in the Upper West Side. "With this rain, it'll take her 2 hours to get here," Mark replied, already mentally calculating all the options. "And Peter can't wait that long." It was then that the electricity finally gave out, plunging the house into total darkness. The sound of the rain on the roof intensified into a constant roar, and the thunder echoed like heavy artillery over the city. Peter began to cry softly, more from discomfort and confusion than fear. Mark picked him up, feeling how the small body radiated heat through the flannel pajamas. "Dad," Isabella said in the dark, her voice heavy with an idea. "What if we asked Ellen for help?" Mark hesitated. In the 3 weeks since dinner, his relationship with the neighbor had developed naturally. Morning greetings when they left for school, quick chats at the gate when they returned from shopping, the occasional chocolate truffle that mysteriously appeared at his door on weekends. But asking for help in an emergency felt like too big a step in neighborly intimacy. "I don't know, Isa. It's a lot of responsibility to put on her." "Dad, Peter is burning up with fever," Isabella said with the brutal practicality of teenagers. "And she has a daughter she must understand." A particularly loud thunderclap made the whole house shake, deciding the issue. Mark handed Peter to Isabella and, using his cell phone flashlight, ran through the torrential rain to the house next door. When he rang the doorbell, he noticed that Ellen's house was also without electricity, but there was a soft candlelight in the living room window. She answered quickly, wearing a light blue cotton nightgown under a white robe, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. "Mark, what happened?" she immediately asked, seeing the look of panic on his face. "Ellen, I'm sorry to bother you at a time like this, but Peter has a very high fever, and I need to take him to the hospital, but I can't leave Isabella alone with this storm, and—" "Where is he?" she interrupted, already grabbing her keys from the entryway table. "At home, with Isabella." "Let's go," she said simply, locking the door and running with him through the rain. At Mark's house, lit by makeshift cell phone flashlights, Ellen immediately took control of the situation with an efficiency that revealed previous experience with childhood emergencies. "Hi, Peter," she said softly, placing her hand on his forehead. "Not feeling well?" Peter, who had been quietly crying in Isabella's lap, stopped to look at Ellen. "I hurt," he murmured. "I know, sweetheart. Your dad is going to take you to the hospital, and they will take good care of you." "Okay," she turned to Mark with a determined expression. "Go with him. Now, I'll stay with Isabella and Emily until you return." "Ellen, it's a lot to ask." "Mark," she said firmly, "you would do the same for me if it were Emily who was sick?" He looked at her for a second, then nodded. "I would." "Then hurry up. Every minute counts when it's a child's fever. The trip to the emergency room was a nightmare of flooded streets and chaotic traffic, but Peter was safe in the back seat, wrapped in blankets and following the instructions Ellen had whispered in his ear. Breathe slowly, count to 10, think of good things. At the hospital, after 2 hours of waiting, tests and medication, the diagnosis was a bacterial throat infection, serious but treatable with antibiotics. Peter finally fell asleep in the car on the way back, the fever already starting to go down. When they got home, it was almost 2 in the morning. The power had come back, and Mark found the house organized in a way he had never seen before. Isabella was sleeping on the living room sofa, covered with a blanket that wasn't his. In the kitchen, there was a note in Ellen's careful handwriting. Isabella had a sandwich and drank chamomile tea. Emily is sleeping in my lap on the armchair. She didn't want to go home until Peter returned. There's chicken soup with noodles in the fridge. Just heat it up. If anything, wake me up. Ellen P.S. Isabella is an amazing girl. You should be very proud. Mark found Ellen asleep in the armchair, Emily curled up in her lap like a kitten, both covered by a blue blanket. The scene had a domestic tenderness that made something tighten in his chest. Ellen, he whispered softly. She opened her eyes immediately, with the maternal reflex of someone used to waking up for emergencies. How is Peter? She asked quietly, so as not to wake Emily. He'll be fine. Bacterial infection, but he already had antibiotics. Ellen closed her eyes for a second, a sigh of relief escaping her lips. Thank goodness. I was worried. Ellen, Mark said, sitting on the edge of the sofa to be at her eye level. I can't thank you enough for what you did today. You don't need to thank me. That's what we do for friends. The word friends hung in the air between them, laden with a meaning that they both felt, but none verbalized. How did you know exactly what to do? He asked. You were so efficient, as if you had been through this before. Ellen hesitated, unconsciously playing with Emily's hair. I have. Emily had pneumonia when she was younger. We spent the whole night at the hospital, just the two of us. Her father wasn't present, Ellen said simply, in a way that made it clear that the subject was not open for discussion. Mark nodded, respecting her. Boundaries. Well, he said, getting up, let me take you home. Actually, Ellen said, looking at the sleeping Emily, would it be possible for her to sleep here? I don't want to wake her now, and tomorrow is Saturday. Of course, Isabella's room has an extra bed. Together, they carried the two sleeping girls to Isabella's room. Emily in the extra bed, Isabella in her own bed, both unaware of the nighttime transfers. At the front door, Ellen quickly said goodbye. If there's any problem during the night, anything, just call me, she said. Ellen, Mark called her as she was already crossing the small garden between the houses. Seriously, thank you so much. She turned around, and even in the dim light of the street lamp, he could see that she was smiling. You're welcome, Mark. That's what neighbors do, remember? On Saturday morning, Mark woke up to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. Peter was visibly better, sitting at the table with Isabella and Emily, all having breakfast as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Dad! Peter shouted when he saw him appear. Emily made pancakes. With Isabella's help, Emily added modestly, pointing to a stack of golden pancakes in the center of the table. Where is your mother? Mark asked, serving himself coffee and admiring the girl's culinary skills. She left early to buy medicine for Peter, Isabella explained. She said she was going to the 24-hour pharmacy and the grocery store to get things to make chicken soup. She didn't have to. Dad, Isabella interrupted him with that teenage inflection that indicated she was about to say something important. Ellen is nice, really. Last night while you were out, she didn't stay on her phone or try to make me. Go to bed early. We talked about a lot of things. What kind of things? Girl things, Isabella said evasively, but with a smile that Mark hadn't seen in months. And about you. About me? She wanted to know if you were okay, if we were okay, if... I don't know, if you felt overwhelmed taking care of everything by yourself. Emily, who had been listening to the conversation while cutting her pancakes into perfect pieces, looked at Mark with her big, serious eyes. My mom said you're a really good dad, she said simply, and that we were lucky to find you. There was something in the way she said that suggested that finding good people was not something common in her and Ellen's lives. Ellen returned an hour later, carrying grocery bags and pharmacy bags, her hair still damp from the morning drizzle. She had changed out of the nightgown from the previous night into jeans and an olive green shirt that highlighted her eyes, but there was still a casual intimacy in her appearance that spoke of someone who had spent the night caring for a family that wasn't technically hers. "How's our patient?" she asked, ruffling Peter's hair. "Much better, thanks to Dr. Ellen," Peter replied, making her laugh. "I brought the medicine the doctor prescribed," she said, handing the pharmacy bag to Mark. "And ingredients for chicken soup. I thought it would be good to have something light for him to eat in the next few days." Mark looked inside. The Ellen grabbed a grocery bag and saw that she had bought not only the prescribed medications, but also children's vitamin C, throat lozenges, and a natural syrup made with honey and propolis. "Ellen, how much was all this?" "Don't worry about that now," she said, already starting to take ingredients for the chicken soup out of the grocery bags. "Ellen—" "Mark," she interrupted, turning to face him directly. "Yesterday you told me that neighbors help each other. Today it's my turn to help." There was a determination in her voice that discouraged arguments, but also something deeper, as if helping this family was important to her in a way that went beyond simple neighborly kindness. As she prepared the chicken soup in the kitchen, moving around with increasing familiarity, Mark watched her interact with the children. There was nothing forced or performative about her affection. She automatically cut Peter's fruit into smaller pieces because she remembered he preferred it that way, listened to Isabella's dramatic stories about school conflicts with genuine attention, and included Emily in conversations without making it seem like she was being especially careful with her own daughter. It was as if she naturally fit into their family dynamic, filling spaces that Mark didn't even know existed. "Mom," Emily said during lunch, "can I sleep over again tonight? Isabella said we could have a movie night in the living room." Ellen hesitated, looking at Mark. "If it's not, I'm too much trouble." "It's never too much trouble," Mark replied, realizing he truly felt that way. That night, after a whole Saturday of movies, card games, and conversations that flowed naturally from morning until dusk, Ellen finally took Emily home. At the door, she turned to Mark one last time. "Thank you for the weekend," she said softly. "I should be the one thanking you. You saved our lives last night." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You saved ours." There was an intensity in her voice that made Mark realize she was talking about something bigger than just Peter's medical emergency. "Ellen," he began, but she was already crossing the garden with Emily, waving good night. That night, as he checked on Peter one last time before bed and saw Isabella voluntarily organizing her room for the first time in months, Mark reflected on how the last 24 hours had changed something fundamental in his life. Ellen was not just a kind neighbor. She had become part of the functioning of his family in a way he didn't know how to categorize or define. And more importantly, her presence had brought back something he thought he had lost forever. The feeling that his house was a complete home. But there were mysteries about Ellen that he still didn't understand. Where had she really come from? Why was a clearly educated and competent woman starting over alone with a small daughter? And why, In the few times she mentioned her past, was there always that subtle hesitation that suggested carefully guarded secrets? As he listened to Peter breathing peacefully in the next room and the soft sound of Ellen's television through the thin walls of the townhouse, Mark realized he was beginning to care too much about the answers to these questions, and that, he recognized, could be both the best and the worst thing that could happen to him. May arrived in New York with that characteristic melancholy of autumn, when the mornings were cold and the afternoons still held a remnant of warmth that made people walk the streets of Brooklyn in layers of clothing, never quite knowing how to dress. It was a Saturday morning when the discovery that would change everything happened in the most casual way possible. Ellen had asked to use Mark's printer. Hers had broken, and she needed to print some important documents to resolve bureaucratic issues at Emily's school. As had become customary between them after almost 2 months of increasingly close neighborliness, she had the house keys for emergencies, just as he had hers. "I'll just run upstairs quickly to print a few things, okay?" she had said on Thursday night when she brought fresh chocolate truffles to accompany coffee after dinner. "Sure. The office is on the 2nd floor, first door on the right. The printer's already on." On Saturday morning, Mark had taken the kids to Central Park to let Peter burn off energy and for Isabella to practice skating, an activity she had recently resumed as a way to exercise without looking like she was trying to be fit. When they returned home around noon, they found Ellen coming out of the back door, which led directly to the office. "Did you manage to print everything?" Mark asked, noticing that she looked slightly flustered. "I did, thanks," she replied quickly, but there was something different in her voice, a subtle tension he couldn't identify. "Mum, can I go play with Peter?" Emily asked, already running toward the backyard where Peter was setting up a track for his toy cars. "Of course, sweetheart," Ellen replied, but her eyes were fixed on Mark in a strange way. "Is everything okay?" he asked, moving closer. "Mark," she said hesitantly, Can I talk to you? Alone?" Isabella, who had developed a radar for adult tensions, immediately offered to watch the younger kids. "I'll make them a snack in the backyard," she announced, disappearing into the kitchen with diplomatic efficiency. Ellen followed Mark into the living room, but instead of sitting down, she stood near the window, looking out at the street as if organizing her thoughts. "When I was in your office," she began slowly, "a document fell from your file when I was messing with the printer. I didn't mean to snoop, I swear, but when I bent down to pick it up..." She turned to face him, and Mark saw that her eyes were too bright, as if she were holding back tears. It was a newspaper clipping from the New York Times from March of this year. Mark's stomach dropped. He knew exactly which clipping she had found. "Ellen, heir to a sugar empire disappears on the eve of her wedding," she quoted from memory, her voice trembling slightly. "Ellen Christina Carter, only daughter of magnate John Carter, owner of Carter Sugar and Alcohol, abandoned her mansion in San Jose on Saturday morning, taking only her 8-year-old daughter and a few clothes." The silence that followed was deafening. Through the window they could hear the laughter of children in the backyard, a painful contrast to the tension that had settled in the room. "You knew," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Ellen, I can explain. How long have you known who I am?" Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that Ellen had learned to recognize as a sign that he was struggling internally with something. 3 weeks, he finally admitted. "Remember when you left that handwritten recipe for chocolate truffles? I recognized your handwriting. It was identical to the signature on the photos in the newspaper. And you didn't say anything. What was I supposed to say?" Mark stepped closer to her, but stopped when he saw Ellen instinctively take a step back. That I knew you were escaping a life that suffocated you, that I completely understood why someone would abandon $500 million to raise their daughter in peace. You should have told me you knew, Ellen said, and now the tears were really streaming down her cheeks. I trusted you, Mark. I told you about Emily's infection, about how hard it was to be alone in the hospital, about... And I never broke that trust. Mark gently interrupted her. Your secret has been safe with me since the day I found out, and it would remain safe forever. But why? Ellen asked, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Why didn't you ask about the money, about the inheritance, about all the opportunities that... Because I fell in love with Ellen, the woman who makes chocolate truffles at 2 a.m. when she can't sleep, Mark said, the words spilling out before he could censor them. The mother who teaches her daughter to make perfect pancakes, who stays up all night caring for a sick neighbor's child, who laughs at Peter's bad jokes as if they were the funniest thing in the world. Ellen stopped crying, her eyes wide with surprise. Mark! I fell in love with the woman who showed up at my door, asking for sugar on a rainy morning and never left, he continued, taking a step toward her. Not the heiress of a sugar empire, you, for who you are when no one is watching. You don't understand, Ellen said, shaking her head. It's not just about money, it's about my whole family looking for me, about Robert. Robert, my ex-fiancé, the man my father chose for me to marry. He hasn't given up, Mark. He hired private investigators. It's only a matter of time before they find me here. Ellen let herself fall onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. My father is sick, she continued, her voice muffled. Heart problems, and there's a clause in my grandfather's will that says if I don't marry by the end of the year, I lose not only the inheritance, but also custody of Emily. My family could go to court claiming that I don't have the financial means to raise her properly. Mark felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. They can really do that. With the lawyers my family has, with the political influence Robert has in the countryside, they can try, and the chances of success are real. Mark sat down, next to her on the sofa, carefully keeping a respectful distance. That's why you ran away. I couldn't marry him, Ellen said, finally lifting her head to look at Mark. Robert is cold, controlling. He saw our marriage as a business merger, not as a union of people, and the way he looked at Emily, she shuddered. He made it clear that having a stepdaughter was not in his plans, that it would be better if she were raised by someone else, maybe my parents, maybe a boarding school, so as not to complicate our fresh start. The anger Mark felt was so intense it surprised him. The idea of someone suggesting separating Ellen from Emily, of breaking the touching bond between mother and daughter that he had witnessed daily, was unbearable. Ellen, he said carefully, can I ask why you kept that newspaper clipping? Because sometimes I need to remember what I'm running from, she replied with brutal honesty. On the hard days, when Emily asks why we can't go home, when money is tight, when I feel completely alone, I read the clipping and remember why it's worth it. You're not alone, Mark said softly. Ellen looked at him with an expression that mixed hope and fear. I'm not. No, he confirmed, reaching out to lightly touch hers. At least not while I'm here. From the backyard came the voices of the children, Isabella teaching Emily and Peter how to make paper airplanes. The sound of children's laughter created a domestic soundtrack that contrasted with the intensity of the conversation in the room. Mark, Ellen said quietly, you don't understand what you're offering to face. My family has a lot of power. Robert has political connections throughout the state of New York. If they find out that I'm getting involved with someone, they could use that against me in the custody battle. How? They'll claim I'm irresponsible, that I'm exposing Emily to inappropriate situations, that my judgment is compromised by hasty relationships. Mark was silent for a few minutes, processing the implications of what Ellen was saying. What if it wasn't hasty? He finally asked. What do you mean? What if I've been in love with you for a long time? What if the last few weeks have only confirmed what I already knew since that first rainy morning? When did you show up at my door? Ellen looked at him with wide eyes. Mark, you can't be serious. Why can't I? Because you hardly know me, because you have 2 kids to think about, because I come with baggage that could destroy the peaceful life you've built here. Ellen, Mark said, turning to face her completely, do you think my life was peaceful before you showed up? Do you think waking up every morning to the same mechanical routine, cooking for myself and the kids without anyone to talk to after they go to bed, spending entire weekends without adult conversation, do you think that was peace? He stood up, walking over to the window. It was loneliness, he said simply. I was functioning, surviving, being a decent father, but I wasn't living. And now you are. Mark turned to look at her. For the last 2 months, for the first time in years, I wake up excited to see what kind of excuse Emily will come up with to come over in the morning. I look forward to finding out what flavor of chocolate truffle you'll try this weekend. I spend the day at work thinking of interesting stories to tell at dinner because I know you'll be here to listen. Ellen was crying again, but this time it was tears of a different emotion. Mark, I know it's complicated. I know there are risks. But Ellen, for the first time since Sarah left me, I felt like part of a real family. Not just a single dad trying not to mess everything up, but part of something bigger. And what if it goes wrong? She asked. What if they find out and it becomes a public scandal? What if your kids end up exposed to all of this? And what if it goes right? Mark countered. What if we find a way to get through all of this together? At that moment, Peter appeared in the doorway, holding a paper airplane. Dad, look at this cool thing Emily taught me, he said excitedly, then stopped when he sensed the tension in the room. Are you guys fighting? No, champ, Mark replied quickly, just talking about adult stuff. Okay, Peter said, clearly satisfied with the explanation. Is Ellen staying for lunch again? Mark and Ellen exchanged glances. That depends on Ellen, Mark said softly. Peter approached Ellen with the unguarded confidence he had developed with her over the past few weeks. Will you stay, Aunt Ellen? He asked, using the affectionate title he had started to use naturally. Isabella said she was going to make lasagna. Ellen looked at the 6-year-old boy with his bright green eyes and the crumpled paper airplane in his hand, then at Mark, who was watching her with an expression that mixed hope and determination. I will, she finally said, but we need to keep talking afterward. Yay! Peter shouted, running back to the backyard. Guys, Aunt Ellen is staying. The cheers of joy from Emily and Isabella reached the room, and Ellen couldn't help but smile a little. See how they already consider you part of the family, Mark said gently. And does that scare you? No, she replied without hesitation. It gives me hope. Ellen stood up, smoothing her shirt in a nervous gesture. Mark, I need you to understand one thing. If this becomes something more serious, you and your kids might end up in the middle of a family war that could last for years. Lawsuits, media exposure, investigations into your finances, your personal life. Ellen, Mark interrupted her, stepping closer until he was right next to her. You're giving me reasons to be afraid, but you're not giving me reasons to give up. He extended his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she accepted it. We'll figure this out together, he said. One step at a time, but together. Ellen looked at their intertwined hands, then at Mark's determined face. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? I'm sure I don't want to get into anything without you. From the backyard came the sound of Isabella calling for lunch, and they both laughed at the perfect timing of the interruption. "Let's eat," Ellen said, "but promise me one thing." "What?" "If at any point you realize this is negatively affecting Peter or Isabella, you tell me. They always come first, okay?" "Okay," Mark agreed, "but I have a condition too." "What?" "Stop thinking you don't deserve to be happy. Stop punishing yourself for wanting a life different from what your family planned for you." Ellen looked at him for a long moment, as if she were seeing something in him that she hadn't noticed before. "I can try. That's all I need," Mark said, smiling. Together they walked toward the kitchen where 3 kids were waiting for them, with a set table and a lasagna that smelled of fresh basil and melted cheese. It was just another Saturday lunch in Brooklyn, but they both knew something fundamental had changed between them. The secrets were on the table now, and for the first time since they met, they could build something based on complete truth. Whatever came next, they would face it together. June arrived in New York, bringing not only the characteristic dry cold of winter, but also the excitement of the block parties that transformed every school, every neighborhood, every little piece of the city into a warm celebration, in contrast to the low temperatures. Brooklyn, with its natural inclination for festivals and community celebrations, had organized its traditional block party in the neighborhood's central square, an event that had brought families together for decades. It was a Friday night when Isabella came home from school with a crumpled notice in her backpack and a determined expression on her face. "Dad, the school block party is tomorrow, but the neighborhood one is next Saturday," she announced, throwing her backpack on the floor by the entrance. "And I want to go to both." "2 block parties?" Mark asked, looking up from his laptop. In the office, he was reviewing financial spreadsheets. "Since when do you have an interest in square dancing and hot apple cider?" "Since Ellen said she was taking Emily," Peter replied from the living room, where he was watching cartoons, "and that she knew how to make homemade corn pudding just like her grandmother." Mark smiled. In the 3 weeks that had passed since the conversation about the newspaper clippings, Ellen had become an even more constant presence in their lives, but now with a transparency that made every moment feel more genuine. She had shared more details about her previous life, the constant family pressures, the suffocating social expectations, how her relationship with Robert had been orchestrated by their parents as if it were a business merger. "Did she really say that about the corn pudding?" Mark asked, closing his laptop. "She did," Isabella confirmed, sitting on the arm of his chair. "And she also said that at her family's farm, they had the best block parties in all of rural New York, with a real bonfire, live accordion music and everything." There was a melancholy in Isabella's voice when she mentioned the farm, and Mark realized that his daughter had sensed that Ellen's life was something lost, not just temporarily left behind. "Well then, let's go to both parties," he decided. "But you're going to have to help me with the outfits. I have no idea how to dress for these things." "Ellen already said she would lend me clothes from her college days," Isabella said casually. But Mark didn't miss the implication. Ellen had studied at a time when attending block parties was a natural part of college life, not just a social obligation. On the Saturday of the school block party, while they all got ready together at Mark's house, it had become natural for Ellen and Emily to prepare there when going out as a group. Mark had the chance to observe a different Ellen. She had swapped her usual understated clothes for a flared red and yellow skirt, a white puff-sleeve blouse, and braids in her hair adorned with colorful ribbons. She was unrecognizable, transformed into a younger, carefree version of herself. "You look different," he commented when she appeared in the living room, helping Emily adjust her braids. "How so?" "More free, like you're playing at being someone else." Ellen laughed, but there was a note of sadness in her laughter. "Actually, I'm playing at being who I was before. I love block parties. I've always loved them. On the farm, June was my favorite month of the year. And now? Now I'm trying to remember what it was like to be happy without feeling guilty about it. At the school block party, filled with colourful banners fluttering in the chilly June wind and the irresistible aroma of caramel popcorn, corn pudding, and steaming hot apple cider, Ellen really seemed like a completely different person. She danced the square dance with obvious ease, helped at the fishing booth with the competence of someone used to community events, and taught Peter how to make popcorn over the bonfire with the patience of someone who had done it hundreds of times. "Where did you learn to do that?" Mark asked, watching her handle the popcorn maker over the coals with professional expertise. "From my grandfather," she replied, stirring the kernels with precise movements. Every June, he insisted on preparing the bonfire himself. He said popcorn made over the fire had a soul that microwave popcorn didn't. "Do you miss that?" Ellen stopped stirring the popcorn for a second, looking at the dancing flames. "I miss what it represented," she said carefully. "The simplicity, the family gathered without ulterior motives, the genuine joy. But I don't miss the constant pressure, the judging looks, the conversations about, when are you going to settle down for real? And if you could have one without the other?" "I don't know if that's possible," she replied, handing the first portion of popcorn to Peter, who was eagerly waiting. "Families like mine, everything comes with conditions." During the main square dance, when the kids paired up to dance, and Ellen was invited by a visibly interested single father, Mark felt a pang of jealousy that surprised him with its intensity. He watched Ellen dance politely, but without enthusiasm, always keeping a respectful distance, always redirecting the conversation to neutral topics when the man tried to deepen his interest. "Are you jealous?" Isabella appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of hot apple cider. "Was it that obvious?" "Just a little," she said, offering one of the cups. "But relax, she keeps looking at you the whole time." "Isabella, Dad, I'm not stupid. I know you like each other, and you know what? I approve." Mark looked at her, surprised. "Approve? Ellen is cool, really. She doesn't try to be my friend just to impress you. She's genuine. And Peter loves her in a way he hasn't loved anyone since Mom left. And you?" Isabella took a sip of her hot apple cider, considering the question. "I was scared at first. Scared it would be like Mom, that she'd stick around for a while and then decide family was too complicated. But she's not like that." "How do you know?" "Because she calls me out when necessary," Isabella said simply. "Last week, when I left the dirty dishes in the sink and said I would do them later, she told me that later never comes and that responsibility isn't optional, just like you would. And is that good? It's real. She's not trying to win me over by being the cool aunt who lets me do whatever. She's being maternal, for real." Isabella's observation echoed in Mark's mind for the rest of the party. When Ellen finally freed herself from the overly interested dance partner and came to join them at the bonfire, he watched her interact with the kids, not as a special guest, but as someone who had naturally taken on a familial role. "Tired of dancing?" he asked when she sat down next to him on the makeshift bench. "I'm tired of," politely smiling at invitations to get to know the neighborhood over coffee, she replied softly, laughing. "Apparently a single woman at a block party is a magnet for recently divorced men." "I can fix that," Mark said before thinking. "How?" He looked into her eyes, seeing the flames of the bonfire reflected in her golden irises. "By dancing the next square dance with you, making it clear that you're not available." Ellen fell silent for a few seconds, and Mark wondered if he had been too presumptuous. "Mark," she finally said, "are you sure you want to expose yourself like this in public? Everyone will start commenting, asking questions." "Let them comment," he said, surprising himself with his determination. I'm tired of pretending we're just neighbors when clearly we're much more than that. The next square dance was announced by the announcer as the Lovers' Square Dance, specifically intended for couples. Mark stood up, extending his hand to Ellen. "Want to date me in a square dance?" he asked, using childlike terminology to break the tension. Ellen laughed, that musical laugh he had learned to love, and took his hand. "I do." The square dance was a revelation. Ellen knew all the steps by heart, guiding Mark through the changes of direction and spins with a grace that spoke of years of practice. But more than that, she smiled in a way he had never seen, open, carefree, genuinely happy. It was as if the music and dance had unlocked a version of her that had been hidden for too long. "En arrière," shouted the announcer, and Ellen spun under Mark's arm with a lightness that made him momentarily forget all the other couples around. "You dance really well," he said when they faced each other at the end of a sequence. "You too," she replied, and there was something different in her eyes, an intensity that made his heart race. "Want to know a secret?" she asked as they walked hand in hand in a circle with the other couples. "Always. I dreamed of this, of square dancing, of dancing with someone I chose, not someone chosen for me." The brutal simplicity of the confession hit him like a punch to the chest. How many basic things had Ellen been deprived of experiencing because of family expectations? When the music ended and applause echoed through the square, Ellen didn't let go of his hand immediately. Instead, she stood still for a few seconds, looking around at the crowd of families, children playing, couples of all ages celebrating together. "This is how it should be," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "What?" "Life. Simple, genuine. No hidden agendas or impossible expectations." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "It can be like this, Ellen. It can be exactly like this." "Can I tell you something else?" she asked, turning to face him completely. "Of course. I fell in love with you weeks ago, but I was too scared to admit it. Scared of bringing my problems into your life. Scared of hurting the kids if things went wrong. Scared of—" "Ellen," he gently interrupted, "I fell in love with you weeks ago too, and I was scared as well." "Of what?" "Of you realizing you deserve someone without all the baggage I carry. 2 kids, a complicated ex-wife, a life that sometimes feels more like military logistics than romance." "Mark," Ellen said, freeing one of her hands to touch his face, "your baggage is 2 amazing kids who make me want to be a better person, and your organized life gives me a security I've never had. Even knowing that everything could get more complicated when your family finds out where you are." "Especially because of that," she replied, "because for the first time in my life I have something worth protecting." At that moment, Peter came running up, closely followed by Emily and a smiling Isabella. "Dad, Aunt Ellen, I won a goldfish at the fishing game," Peter shouted, holding a bag with a goldfish. "Wow, that's beautiful," Ellen exclaimed, bending down to admire the prize. "What are you going to name him?" "Goldie," Peter replied with the straightforward creativity of a 6-year-old. "Perfect name," Mark agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "Can I take him home?" Peter asked. "Of course, but you'll have to take good care of him. Aunt Ellen can help me. She knows about animals because she lived on a family farm." Mark and Ellen exchanged glances over Peter's head, both laughing at how naturally the boy assumed Ellen would be part of the daily care for the fish. "I can," Ellen replied, "but we'll need to buy a proper aquarium for him." "Tomorrow?" Peter asked eagerly. "Tomorrow is Sunday. The stores are closed," Isabella interjected with teenage practicality. "But we can go on Monday after school." Again, Mark noticed the inclusive "we." His kids had naturally expanded the definition of family to include Ellen and Emily in a way that seemed inevitable in retrospect. Later, as they were heading home loaded with treats, From the block party, and with Peter sleeping in the back seat clutching the bag with Goldie, Ellen broke the comfortable silence in the car. "Mark, can I sleep at your house tonight?" He looked at her in surprise. It was the first time she had made such a direct request. "Of course, but is there a specific reason?" "Yes," she said, looking out the window. "Today I felt like part of a real family for the first time in years. I don't want that to end at 11 o'clock tonight when I have to go home. And Emily already assumed she's sleeping with Isabella. Apparently they planned that during the fishing game." Mark laughed. "Our daughters are natural strategists." "They're smart," Ellen corrected. "They know we're happier together." That night, after all the kids were asleep, Peter in his room with the makeshift aquarium for Goldie on his bedside table, and the girls in Isabella's room whispering about girl things, Ellen and Mark. They stayed in the living room talking until late. She had changed from her party dress into a simple nightgown that Isabella had lent her, and she was curled up in the armchair, with a blanket holding a cup of chamomile tea. The soft light from the lamp created an intimate atmosphere that made the living room feel even cozier. "Thank you for the best day I've had in a long time," she said, stirring her tea. "It really was special," Mark agreed. "Seeing you dance, laugh, it was like getting to know a new version of you." "It's not new. It's the version I've hidden for years because it doesn't fit what they expect from a responsible heiress." "Well, from now on, that's the only version I want to know." Ellen smiled, but there was a shadow of concern in her eyes. "Mark, I need to tell you something. I got a call this morning before the party." Her tone made Mark sit up straight immediately. "Your family?" "My father. He has improved a bit from his heart issues, and he's starting to pressure me again to come back. And he said he has a new proposal, that if I return by the end of July, he guarantees I won't have to marry Robert immediately, that I can have some time to readjust to family life. But I would have to go back to the family farm with Emily and accept a fiancé he considers appropriate within 2 years. Mark fell silent, processing the implications. "And if you don't accept?" "Then they will speed up the process of questioning my ability to raise Emily alone. My father made it clear that he has lawyers ready to file a lawsuit claiming abandonment and mental instability. Can they do that? With the connections they have, with the money they have, they can try. And even if they don't win, the process could take years and cost a fortune I don't have." Ellen sat, her cup on the table and curled up even more in the armchair. "Mark, I don't know what to do. For the first time in my life, I found a place where I can be myself, where Emily can grow without pressure, where I truly fell in love. But what if fighting for this means losing my daughter?" Mark stood up and sat on the arm of her chair, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Ellen, look at me," he said softly. She raised her eyes, and he saw tears beginning to form. "We will find a way out. I don't know how yet, but we will. You won't have to choose between being happy and being a mother." "How can you be so sure?" "Because now it's us against them, and because I won't let anyone separate you from Emily or separate you two from our family." Ellen leaned against him, and Mark felt a few tears wet his shirt. "Promise?" "I promise," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We'll figure out how to win this together." From the hallway came the soft sound of Emily whispering with Isabella, probably sharing childhood secrets before bed. It was the sound of a house full of life, of a family that had formed organically through love and mutual need. It was exactly what was worth fighting for. August arrived in New York with that characteristic dryness of the winter that left lips chapped and skin dry, but it also brought the promise of the approaching spring. It was a Tuesday morning when the carefully constructed life of Ellen and Mark began to crack like the asphalt of the city under the strong sun. Mark was in the office, reviewing the numbers of a tech company that had hired his services, when Isabella called in the middle of the morning. Her voice sounded strange, too controlled for a 14-year-old. "Dad, there's a man here at the house asking about Ellen." Mark's blood ran cold instantly. "What kind of man, Isa?" "In a suit, elegant. He said he's a private investigator. He has a badge and everything. He asked if I knew Ellen Cristina Almeida Santos and if I knew where she was." "What did you say?" "That I've never heard that name in my life," Isabella replied promptly, and Mark felt a fierce pride in his daughter's intelligence. "But Dad, he didn't believe me. He said he has pictures of her coming in and out of our house." "Where's Peter?" "At school. I'm home because it's only half day today, due to the parent-teacher meeting. Isa, listen carefully. Lock all the doors and windows now. Don't open for anyone until I get there. I'm going to warn Ellen, and we'll be there in 20 minutes. "Dad, I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart, but you're smart and brave. Just stay locked up until we arrive, okay?" Mark hung up and immediately dialed Ellen, who answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, and even in that moment of panic, Mark felt a tightness in his chest hearing her call him that so naturally. "Ellen, they found you. There's a private investigator at my house asking questions to Isabella." The silence on the other end lasted 3 eternal seconds. "Damn," Ellen murmured, and it was the first time Mark had heard her curse. "I knew it was only a matter of time, but I was hoping to have at least a few more weeks." "Where are you?" "At the grocery store with Emily. We were getting supplies for dinner tonight. Come home now. We need to talk and decide what to do." "Mark," her voice was tense, "maybe it's better if I leave. Pick up Emily and get out of the city before—" "Ellen," he interrupted firmly, "you're not going anywhere alone. Come home. Now." 30 minutes later, everyone was gathered in Mark's living room. Ellen had arrived visibly shaken, holding Emily's hand with a fierce protectiveness that made Mark's heart tighten. Isabella was pale but determined, recounting everything that had happened with the precision of an experienced witness. He said, "His name was Richard Anderson," he reported. Consulting a paper where he had noted everything, he showed a licensed private investigator's badge. He specifically asked about Ellen Cristina Almeida Santos, showed a picture of her, a good picture, not from a security camera. Ellen groaned softly. "What picture?" "Recent. You were leaving the grocery store with Emily. Last week, from what I could see." "They've been watching for a while," Ellen said, sitting heavily on the sofa. "It wasn't a coincidence that he showed up today. They were probably waiting for a chance to talk to someone from the family alone." Peter, who had been picked up from school in a hurry, didn't fully understand the situation, but sensed the tension. He approached Ellen and climbed onto her lap with his usual confidence. "Aunt Ellen, why are you sad?" he asked, resting his little head on her shoulder. Ellen hugged the boy, closing her eyes for a second. "Just some boring adult stuff, sweetheart. Nothing you need to worry about." But Emily, at 8 years old, had inherited her mother's insight and knew something serious was happening. "Mom," she whispered when they were alone in the kitchen, "are they going to try to take us back?" The innocent question created a heavy silence in the room. Ellen looked at Mark with a barely concealed panic expression. "No one is going to take you anywhere," Mark said before Ellen could respond. His voice had a firmness that made all the children look at him. "This is your home now. No one is going to separate our family." "Mark," Ellen began, "you can't promise that. If they file a lawsuit—" "Then we will be prepared," he interrupted her. "Ellen, do you have any documents proving your ability to raise Emily? Income statements, medical records, school records?" I have some, but you don't have a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer who can match those my family has. Mark was silent for a few seconds, then grabbed his phone. I'm going to call my sister Patricia. She's a family law attorney in Washington, D.C. It may not be New York, but she understands federal legislation. While Mark spoke quietly with his sister in the office, explaining the situation in general terms, Ellen organized the children for a late snack, maintaining a forced normality that fooled no one but Peter. "Mom," Emily whispered when they were alone in the kitchen, "are we going to have to leave here?" Ellen stopped cutting apples, resting her hands on the counter. "I don't know, sweetheart. Mum will do everything to keep us here, but it's complicated." "I don't want to leave," Emily said, and her voice had a determination that reminded her of her mother. "I like the school here. I like Peter and Isabella. I like Mr. Mark." "I do too, Emily. I do too." Mark returned from the call with a slightly more optimistic expression. "Patricia is going to send some of her known attorneys here in New York, family law specialists, who aren't intimidated by name or money. Mark, this is going to cost a fortune. Ellen, let me worry about that now, okay? The important thing is for you and Emily to stay protected. I can't let you spend your savings on my problems." "They're not your problems," Mark said firmly. "They're our problems, and they're not problems. They're challenges we will overcome together." Isabella, who had been quietly observing the conversation, finally spoke up. "Dad, what if we make a document, like a statement that Ellen is a great mom and that Emily is happy here?" "What kind of document?" "I don't know. Testimonials from Emily's school, from the pediatrician, from the neighbors, to show that she has a stable life here." Mark looked at his daughter with admiration. "Isa, that's a brilliant idea. Ellen, do you have contacts with Emily's school? With doctors who follow her?" "I do. The educational coordinator, the teacher, the pediatrician from the health clinic. Let's start tomorrow. We'll document everything. Residential stability, Emily's school progress, social integration, regular medical follow-ups." That night, after Peter and Emily went to bed, the four gathered in the living room to discuss strategies. Isabella had insisted on participating, claiming she was old enough to understand the situation and had the right to help protect the family. "The first thing we need to understand," Mark said, consulting some notes he had made after the conversation with Patricia, "is what kinds of allegations they might make against you." "Neglect," Ellen immediately replied. "Emotional instability. Financial incapacity to provide the same standard of living Emily would have with her family. And the ability to raise a child without a traditional family structure," Isabella added, surprising everyone with her adult perception of the situation. "What? Dad, I'm not dumb. A single mother renting without family nearby, getting involved with a man she's known for a short time. They're going to use all of that." Ellen looked at Isabella with a mix of admiration and concern. "Isa, you shouldn't have to think about these things. But I do, and you know what? They're wrong. You're the best mom I know. And our family may not be traditional, but it works." "How can we prove that?" Mark asked. "By documenting everything," Isabella said with the determination she had inherited from her father. "Stable routine, regular school monitoring, up-to-date medical care, healthy relationships, and showing that Emily is happy and well-adjusted," Ellen added. "Her grades have improved since we got here. She's made friends. She's more communicative." "I have an idea," Mark said slowly. "What if we filmed a video? Like a home documentary showing a normal day in our family to show what kind of environment Emily is growing up in?" "A video? Think about it. They're going to try to paint a picture of irresponsibility and instability. But if we have a video showing Emily doing homework, playing with Peter, talking with Isabella about school, having family dinner, that dismantles any narrative of neglect Ellen was silent for a few minutes, considering. It could work, but it has to be natural, not... It might seem staged. It will be natural, Peter said from the top of the stairs, where he had appeared in his pajamas. We always do these things anyway. Peter, what are you doing awake? Mark asked. I can't sleep. I'm worried about Aunt Ellen and Emily. Ellen climbed a few steps and sat at his level. Worried about what, sweetheart? About them taking you away. I don't want you to go away. No one is going to take us away, Peter. Your father and your sister are helping us stay here forever. Promise? Ellen looked over her shoulder at Mark, who nodded encouragingly. I promise I will do everything I can to keep us together. Okay, Peter said, satisfied. Can I sleep with you tonight? When I'm worried, I sleep better near adults. Half an hour later, everyone was settled in the living room. Peter and Emily on the big sofa, covered with blankets, Ellen and Mark in the armchairs, Isabella on the floor with cushions. They had decided to have an improvised family movie night to calm the kids down. But in the middle of the movie, Emily got up and came to speak quietly with Mark. Mr. Mark, can I ask you something? Of course, Emily. Are you really not going to let them take us away? Mark looked into those big, serious eyes, so much like their mother's. Emily, I promise you I will do everything in my power to keep you here with us. This is your home now. Even if it's hard, even if it costs a lot of money? Even if it's hard, even if it costs a lot of money? Emily nodded gravely, as if sealing an important agreement. Thank you, I like living here. I like having siblings. She returned to the sofa and curled up next to Peter. But Mark noticed that for the first time since the investigator's arrival, she seemed more relaxed. Ellen had observed the entire interaction, and when Emily fell asleep a few minutes later, she came to sit on the arm of his chair. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For making her feel safe when I don't even know if I can guarantee that. Ellen, we will get through this. And what if we can't? Mark pulled her into his lap, holding her against his chest. Then at least we fought together. But we will make it, Ellen. We have to. Outside, New York continued its relentless nightlife. Cars passing, people returning from work, lights flickering on and off in thousands of windows. But in that room, with two children sleeping on the sofa and a teenager watching a movie as if it were just another normal night, there was a silent determination that this improvised but real family would not be destroyed without a fight. The investigator had found Ellen, but he had also found something he hadn't expected, a woman who was no longer alone and a family willing to protect her. The war was just beginning. September brought to New York that subtle change of season that made New Yorkers put away their heavy coats and start dreaming of afternoons in the park. The mornings were still chilly, but the afternoon sun already carried the promise of the approaching spring. It was on one of those ambiguous mornings, when the fine drizzle created halos around the streetlights, that Ellen's past finally knocked on the door in a literal and inescapable way. Mark was making coffee in the kitchen when he heard the sound of a powerful engine stopping in front of the house. It wasn't the familiar rumble of neighborhood cars, Volkswagens and Chevrolets of neighbors heading off to work. It was something more refined, more expensive. When he looked out the window, he saw a silver luxury car parked on the sidewalk, and his heart raced. "Ellen," he called, keeping his voice steady so as not to alarm the children who were having breakfast. She appeared in the kitchen, carrying Emily's backpack, already ready to take the girl to school. When she saw the expression on his face, she stopped immediately. "What is it?" "There's a luxury car in front of the house, and a man in a suit getting out of it." Ellen's face instantly paled. She dropped the backpack and approached the window, peering carefully. "It's him," she whispered. "Robert." Mark felt a primitive rage rise in his chest, not just jealousy, but something deeper and protective. "Do you want me to answer the door?" "No." If he came here, he wants to talk to me." Ellen straightened her shoulders, adopting a posture that Mark recognized. It was the same one she used when she needed to be strong for Emily. "But I won't let him in the house." The doorbell rang once, then twice in quick succession, an insistent ring suggesting someone used to being answered immediately. "Kids," Ellen said, returning to the table where Peter was finishing his cereal and Emily was sorting school supplies. "I need to talk to someone outside. You stay here with Mr. Mark, okay?" "Who is it, Mom?" Emily asked, and Mark noticed that the girl had recognized the tone of voice her mother used when something serious was happening. "Someone. From our old life," Ellen replied carefully. "Nothing for you to worry about." But Emily, at 8 years old, was too smart to be fooled by evasions. "Is it him? The man you were going to marry?" The silence that followed confirmed all the girl's suspicions. Peter stopped eating, sensing the tension, and Isabella appeared at the kitchen entrance, already dressed for school, but clearly attentive to what was happening. "Emily," Ellen said, kneeling to her daughter's level, "do you remember what we talked about? About how sometimes adults make different choices, and that causes conflicts?" "I remember." "Well, that's what's happening, but nothing is going to change for us, okay? This is still our home. These are still our friends." The doorbell rang again, now accompanied by firm knocks on the door. "Ellen," a male voice called from outside, powerful enough to penetrate the wood of the door. "I know you are. We need to talk." Mark approached Ellen. "Do you want me to go with you?" "No, it's better if I face this alone first, but—" She hesitated. "Can you stay close? Just in case." "I'll be in the living room window. Just shout if you need anything." Ellen nodded, took a deep breath and walked to the front door. Mark quickly organized the kids in the back kitchen where they couldn't see the conversation, but from where he could observe through the living room window. When Ellen opened the door, Mark got his first glimpse of Robert and immediately understood why Ellen's family had considered him a good match. He was undeniably impressive. Tall, well-groomed grey hair, an obviously expensive suit, and a posture that radiated authority and wealth. He was the type of man who commanded boardrooms and expected his words to be treated as decrees. "Ellen," he said, and even from a distance Mark could hear the genuine relief in his voice. "Finally." "Robert," she replied, keeping the door only slightly ajar. "What are you doing here?" "I came to get you, obviously. You disappeared on our wedding day, Ellen. You left 300 guests waiting, humiliated our families." "Our wedding," Ellen interrupted him, and Mark noticed that her voice had gained a firmness he had never heard before. "Robert, I never wanted to marry you, never. That wedding was an arrangement between you and my father. I was just collateral in the deal." "Don't be dramatic. It was a good arrangement for everyone. For everyone but me and Emily." "Ah, yes, the girl." Robert's tone shifted slightly, becoming more calculating. "Where is she? I need to get to know her properly if she's going to be my stepdaughter." "Emily will not be anyone's stepdaughter," Ellen said tersely. "And you won't get to know her because we're not going back." "Ellen, be reasonable. Your father is sick. He needs you at home, and I'm willing to forget about your rebellious phase." Rebellious phase. Mark saw Ellen step out of the house, closing the door behind her. "Robert, I built a life here. Emily has friends, school, stability. In Brooklyn?" Robert looked around with barely concealed disdain. "Ellen, you are the heiress of a $500 million empire. You're living in a townhouse in a middle-class neighborhood. This is not a life for a woman like you." "It's exactly the life I've chosen for myself." "And what will you do when the money runs out? Work as a sales clerk, as a teacher? Ellen, you've never worked a day in your life." "Then I'll learn." Robert laughed, but it was a humorless sound. And what about Emily? Will she grow up without the opportunities she could have as part of our family, without the best schools, without international travel, without a mother who loves her being forced to marry a man who considers her a burden? Ellen interrupted. Robert, you made it very clear that having Emily around would complicate our plans. I said it would be better for her to have a more structured education, excellent boarding schools where she could socialize with children of the same social standing, where she would be far away from me, where she would become a young lady suitable for our social position. Mark watched the conversation with growing anger. It wasn't jealousy. It was indignation at how Robert spoke of Emily as if she were a problem to be solved, not a child to be loved. Robert, Ellen said, her voice carrying a final firmness, I am not going to marry you. I am not going back to the family farm, and I will not hand Emily over to be raised by others. We built a life here, a good life. With whom? Robert asked, and for the first time his voice showed real irritation. Because I know there's someone, Ellen. My investigators told me about your domestic situation here. Mark saw Ellen stiffen. My personal life is no longer your concern. It is when it affects the child who will be my stepdaughter. Emily will never be your stepdaughter. The argument was escalating, and Mark could see Ellen becoming visibly agitated. It was then that he made a decision. Peter, Isabella, take care of Emily, he said to the kids in the kitchen. I'm going to help Ellen. He exited through the back door and circled the house, appearing on the sidewalk behind Robert. Excuse me, he said, keeping his voice polite but firm. Is there a problem here? Robert turned, assessing Mark from head to toe with the calculating gaze of someone used to categorizing people by their economic utility. And you are... Mark, he replied, stepping up to stand beside Ellen. And this is my house where you are disturbing my family. Your family? Robert laughed. Boy, you have no idea who Ellen really is, do you? I know exactly who she is. She is the woman I love, and the mother of the child I consider my daughter. The declaration fell like a bomb in the morning silence. Ellen looked at Mark with wide eyes. It was the first time he had declared his love so openly, and in front of the person who represented all her past. Oh, I see, Robert said, his tone becoming condescending. The knight in shining armor, the savior of the damsel in distress. Robert, stop, Ellen said quietly, but there was a note of warning in her voice. Ellen, be honest with the boy, Robert continued, ignoring her. Tell him about the $500 million you inherited, about the 2,000 acres family farm, about the sugar mills. Would he be so romantic if he knew you could buy the entire block where you live? He knows, Ellen said simply. He knows everything, and still loves me. Robert paused, clearly not expecting that response. Impossible. It is possible, Mark said calmly, because unlike you, I fell in love with Ellen, not her bank account. Boy, you don't understand. Ellen is not an ordinary woman. She has responsibilities, family obligations, a legacy to uphold. Ellen is a woman who has the right to choose your own life, Mark interrupted him, and she chose to stay here with us. Robert looked from Mark to Ellen, then back to Mark, as if re-evaluating the situation. Do you really think you can give her what I can offer? I can give genuine love, respect, a family that accepts her exactly as she is. And money? Financial security? Social status? If she wanted those things, she would have returned to you months ago. Robert fell silent for a few seconds, then laughed, but this time there was a note of real irritation in the sound. Ellen, you are making a mistake that will cost you dearly, for you and for Emily. That sounds like a threat, Mark said, stepping forward. It's not a threat. It's reality. Robert turned to Ellen one last time. Your father's really sick. If something happens to him and you are not home to take over the family business, everything will go to your cousins. Emily will grow up with no inheritance. Emily will grow up with love. That's all she needs. And when she turns 18 and finds out she gave up $500 million because of this, he gestured vaguely to the house. Do you think she will forgive you? For the first time in the conversation, Ellen hesitated, and Mark realized that Robert had touched on a real fear of hers. Ellen, Robert continued, taking advantage of the hesitation, you have until the end of the month. After that, I will file for custody. And with the lawyers I have, I guarantee I will prove that Emily is being exposed to an unsuitable environment. What unsuitable environment? Mark asked, his voice dangerously low. A single mother, emotionally unstable, living off the kindness of a man she has known for only a few months, exposing an 8-year-old child to premature adult relationships. Robert, Ellen said, her voice trembling with anger, you are talking about the most stable and loving family Emily has ever known. Let's see what the judge thinks about that. Robert walked back to the car, then turned one last time. Ellen, you may hate this conversation, but deep down you know I'm right. Emily deserves more than this, and so do you. He got into the Mercedes and drove away, leaving only the smell of expensive exhaust and a tension that felt electrified in the air. Ellen stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds, staring at the empty street where the car had been. Then, without warning, she broke down crying. Mark pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest as he murmured words of comfort and mentally planned how they would fight against what was to come. Inside the house, 3 children watched from the window, not fully understanding what had happened, but sensing that something had fundamentally changed. The war was now official, and the enemy was not just threatening to take Ellen away, he was threatening to destroy the entire family they had built together. October arrived heavy with tensions that piled up like dark clouds, announcing spring storms in New York. In the 2 weeks that followed Robert's visit, the family's life took on a surreal cinematic quality. On the outside, everything remained the same, but underneath pulsed an electric current of anxiety that affected every everyday moment. Mark had become an expert at making whispered calls to lawyers while the children watched television. Ellen had developed the nervous habit of checking the street through the curtains before leaving the house, as if expecting to find other investigators or, worse, law enforcement officials with warrants. The children themselves, with that heightened perception they develop when the adults around them are in crisis, had become more subdued and less mischievous, as if intuitively knowing that it was not the time to create additional problems. It was a Thursday morning when the next bombshell exploded, this time through a phone call that came while Mark was working from home. Mark Anderson. The female voice on the other end was professional, but carried a formality that immediately put him on alert. Yes? My name is Dr. Carla Mendes. I'm a social worker from the Family Court of New York. I need to schedule a home visit to assess the living conditions of minor Emily Anderson. Mark's blood ran cold. A home visit? Yes, sir. We received a formal request questioning the suitability of the environment where the minor is residing. It is a standard procedure in custody disputes. Mark closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation fall on him like a ton of bricks. When would this visit be? Next Monday at 2 p.m. Ms. Ellen Anderson must be present, as well as all residents of the household. And what if we are not available at that time? Sir, the social worker's voice became slightly firmer. This is not a request. It is a court order. If there is no cooperation, it will be duly noted in the report. After hanging up, Mark sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes, processing the implications. A home visit meant that Robert had followed through on his threat. The custody process was already underway. Ellen was in the backyard hanging clothes when he went to tell her. She listened in silence, her hands paused in the middle of hanging one of Peter's shirts on the clothesline. "Monday," she repeated, as if testing the taste of the words. "Ellen, we can do this. The house is always tidy, the kids are well cared for. Emily is visibly happy." "Mark," she gently interrupted him, "they are not looking for evidence that Emily is well cared for. They are looking for justifications to take her away from me." "Then let's make sure they don't find any." Ellen turned to face him, and Mark saw a fierce determination in her eyes that had not been there in recent weeks. "You are right. Let's prepare." The weekend that followed was a military operation disguised as a normal domestic life. Isabella, who had been informed about the visit in age-appropriate terms, took on the role of operations commander with an efficiency that would have made any general proud. "Checklist," she announced on Saturday morning, brandishing a notebook where she had noted everything that needed to be done. "First, complete cleaning of the house, especially the bedrooms and bathrooms." "Isa, the house is always clean," Peter protested. "It has to be spotless," Isabella explained with the patience of someone dealing with civilians who did not understand the gravity of the military situation. "Second, organize all of Emily's documents, school history, vaccination card, medical appointments." "I've already done that," Ellen said, showing a meticulously organized blue folder. "Third, prepare testimonials. Peter, you will explain to the lady how it is okay to play with Emily. I will talk about how she helps me with homework and is a cool sister." Emily, who had remained silent for most of the organization, finally spoke up. "What if she asks if I want to stay here?" "You tell the truth," Ellen replied immediately. "That you are happy here, that you like school, that you have friends. And what if she asks about Dad?" The question created an uncomfortable silence. Emily had never known her father. Ellen had become pregnant very young by a guy who disappeared when he learned of the pregnancy, and the family had treated the matter as a youth mistake that should not be mentioned. "You say it has always been just the two of you," Mark said gently, "and that now you are part of a bigger family." "Can I say that you are like a dad to me?" The question caught Mark completely off guard. He looked at Ellen, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "If it's true, you can." "It is true," Emily said with the simple honesty of 8 years. "You take care of me when I'm sick, help me with homework, play with me. You are really like a dad." On Sunday, the day before the visit, Ellen and Mark stayed up late, reviewing every possible detail. The house was spotless, the documents organized, the children prepared. But there was a tension in the air that no preparation could eliminate. "What if it's not enough?" Ellen asked. Curled up on the couch next to him, "It will be enough. We are offering Emily exactly what every child deserves: love, stability, opportunities to grow. Robert can offer more. Financially, educationally." "Ellen, stop. Emily doesn't need more money. She needs a mother who loves her and a family that accepts her unconditionally." "What if the social worker doesn't see it that way?" Mark pulled Ellen closer, feeling the tension in every muscle of her body. "Then we will appeal, and appeal again, and keep fighting until we succeed." Monday arrived with one of those October mornings that promise warmth later but start cold and damp. At exactly 2 o'clock, a middle-aged woman, hair pulled back in a tight bun and carrying a brown leather briefcase, rang the doorbell. "Dr. Carla Mendez," she introduced herself, showing an official badge. "I'm here for the home evaluation." Mark and Ellen welcomed her with respectful courtesy, but both immediately noticed that the social worker wore a neutral professional expression that revealed absolutely nothing about her intentions or first impressions. "Is this your residence, Mr. Mark?" she asked, consulting a clipboard. "Yes, I have lived here for 5 years with my 2 children." And how long have Miss Ellen and the minor Emily been residing here? Officially, they maintain residency next door, Ellen replied carefully, but we spend a lot of time together as a family. The social worker noted something on her clipboard. I understand. May I see the house? The next 40 minutes were one of the most tense experiences Mark had ever lived. Dr. Carla examined each room with meticulous attention, checking the safety of the windows, the organization of the bedrooms, the hygiene of the bathrooms. She made constant notes, but her face remained an impenetrable professional mask. "And this is the room where Emily sleeps when she is here?" she asked, observing the extra bed in Isabella's room. "Yes," Ellen replied. "She and Isabella have become very close." "How many times a week does this happen?" 2 or 3 times, sometimes more on weekends. More notes on the clipboard. In the living room, Dr. Carla sat in a position that allowed her to observe the whole family gathered. Peter on the floor with his toy cars, Emily helping Isabella with a puzzle, Ellen and Mark on the couch maintaining a respectful distance. "Emily," the social worker said, gently, "may I talk to you?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you like living here?" "I don't live here," Emily replied honestly, "but I really like staying here. It's fun to have siblings." "Siblings?" "Peter and Isabella. They play with me and help me with things." "And Mr. Mark, how is he with you?" Emily looked at Mark with those big, serious eyes. "He is really nice. He teaches me things, tells stories, makes pancakes on Sunday. And when I'm sick, he takes care of me, just like my mum." "And your mum, how is she here?" "My mum is happier here," Emily said simply, and the honesty of the observation made Ellen's heart tighten. "She laughs more, worries less." Dr. Carla made more notes, then turned to Peter. "Peter, do you like playing with Emily?" "I like it a lot. She is nice and doesn't break my cars like some boys at school." "And how do you feel when she is here?" "I'm happy. It's nice to have another sister." For Isabella, the questions were slightly different. "Isabella, as a teenager, how do you see this family situation?" Isabella hesitated for just a second, then answered with the maturity she had developed since her parents' separation. "At first, I was worried because my dad already had too many responsibilities. But Ellen and Emily, they make our family happier. And Emily is like a real sister. For me. Do you feel that your needs are still being met?" "I do. In fact, I think my father is less stressed now. He smiles more." Finally, Dr. Carla asked to speak with Ellen and Mark privately. "I know this is a difficult process," she began, "but I need to ask some direct questions." "Of course," Mark replied. "Miss Ellen, Mr. Robert Mendon has claimed that you are fleeing family responsibilities to live in an inappropriate relationship. How do you respond to that?" Ellen took a deep breath. "Dr. Carla, I fled an arranged marriage that would have destroyed my individuality and harmed my daughter. I did not flee from responsibilities. I took on the responsibility of raising Emily in an environment of love, not obligation. And the relationship with Mr. Mark. This is the first time in my life that I have a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Mr. Mark, are you aware of the complications you may face by getting involved with someone in a family court dispute?" "I am, and I choose to face them because I love Ellen and Emily." "Even knowing that this may affect your own children?" "My kids have never been happier than in the last few months. This family, even though it is not traditional, works." Dr. Carla closed her clipboard and stood up. "I will prepare my report and send it to the judge responsible for the case. You should receive a copy in a few days." At the door, she turned one last time. "For your information, this is one of the most stable and loving homes I have ever evaluated. I hope this is taken into consideration." After she left, the family sat in silence for a few minutes, processing what had happened. I think it went well, Isabella finally said. She seemed to like us, Peter added. Emily approached Ellen and climbed onto her lap. Mom, are we going to be able to stay here? I don't know yet, sweetheart, but we did our part. Now we have to wait. That night, after the kids went to sleep, Ellen and Mark sat on the back porch, watching the barely visible stars through New York's light pollution. I think we did everything right, she said. We did. Now it's a matter of waiting to see if the truth means anything in the judicial system. Mark, Ellen said softly, if we lose, if they take Emily away from me, we're not going to lose. But if we lose, Ellen, look at me. Mark turned to face her completely. If the worst happens, it won't be the end of the story. It will just be the end of the first chapter. We will keep fighting. And what if it takes years? What if it's a battle that lasts until Emily is an adult? Then we fight for years, together. Ellen rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in silence, listening to the nighttime sounds of the city and trying not to think of all the ways their lives could change drastically in the coming weeks. Inside the house, 3 children slept peacefully, trusting that the adults around them would find a way to keep the family that had become the emotional center of their lives together. It was a trust that neither adult was sure they could honor, but they were determined to try. November arrived in New York, bringing with it the humid warmth that precedes summer rains, but also a discovery that would completely change the course of the legal battle for Emily's custody. It was a Friday morning when Mark, checking his work emails before heading to the office, found a message that would turn his world upside down. The sender was Patricia Santos at vagmail.com. His sister Patricia, the lawyer from Washington, D.C., who had been helping with the case. The subject of the message was simply, "Urgent, call now." Mark dialed immediately and Patricia answered. On the first ring, "Mark, are you sitting down?" "I am. What happened?" "Remember I asked my contacts to investigate the background of that Robert Mendon?" "I remember. We found something big." Patricia took a deep breath before continuing. "Your future brother-in-law is not the upstanding rural businessman he appears to be. He is being investigated by the federal police for tax evasion and money laundering. Apparently, he uses shell companies to hide income and transfer money to tax havens." Mark felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Are you sure about this?" "I have the documents here, and there's more. His company has several labor lawsuits for conditions akin to slavery, farm workers kept in subhuman conditions, documents withheld, unpaid wages." My God! Mark, this man is not just a rejected fiancé trying to win back his girlfriend. He needs this marriage to Ellen, because her family's sugar empire is the only thing that can save his businesses from imminent bankruptcy. Mark fell silent, processing the implications. That means... It means his interest in Ellen has always been purely financial, and it means we have ammunition to completely dismantle the custody case. Patricia, are you sure this information is solid? Official documents from the IRS and the Department of Labor, it's all verifiable and admissible in court. After hanging up, Mark sat in the kitchen for a few minutes, trying to organize his thoughts. Ellen was in the backyard hanging clothes, humming softly, a habit she had picked up again in recent weeks, as if the music helped her keep her anxiety in check. "Ellen," he called, "I need to tell you something." She came in drying her hands on a towel and immediately noticed from his expression that something important had happened. "What is it?" Mark told her everything. The investigations by the federal police, the shell companies, the irregular working conditions. Ellen listened in silence, her face going through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally, a bitter understanding. "I should have suspected," she said when he finished. "Robert always had so much money for someone who theoretically just raised cattle, and when he talked about the farm workers, always with so much disdain. Ellen, this changes everything. If we can prove that his interest in you has always been financial." "I can do more than that," Ellen said. A light shone in her eyes. "I can prove he knew I knew." "How?" Ellen went to the bedroom and returned carrying a small shoebox. From inside, she pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Remember I told you I ran away the night before the wedding? It was because I found this in my father's office the night before." She opened the envelope and showed Mark a series of documents, contracts, bank transfers, correspondence. "It's the documentation of the prenuptial agreement that Robert had prepared. If we got married, he would automatically become the majority partner in all the family businesses. My father would lose control and I would just become an employee of my own inheritance." Mark examined the documents, his anger growing with each page. "Ellen, why didn't you show this before?" "Because I was afraid you'd think I was being paranoid, that I was exaggerating." Ellen sat heavily at the kitchen table, "and because part of me was ashamed of having been so naive for so long." "You weren't naive. You were manipulated by people you trusted." At that moment, Emily appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for school. "Good morning," she said cheerfully, then paused upon noticing the tension in the room. "Did something happen?" Ellen and Mark exchanged quick glances. "Just boring adult stuff, sweetheart," Ellen replied. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Emily, with that keen perception she had developed since their lives became complicated, wasn't easily convinced. "Is it about the man who came here, the one who wanted to take me away?" The direct question caught both off guard. "Emily," Ellen began, "Mum, I know you're worried about this. I hear you talking quietly at night, and I know there are people trying to separate us." Ellen knelt to her daughters, level, holding her small hands. "It's true that there are some people trying to complicate our lives here, but I promise I will do everything to keep us together, okay? And will Mark help?" "I will help, yes," Mark said, stepping closer. "We are a family now, Emily, and family doesn't leave anyone behind." Emily nodded gravely, as if processing very important information. "Can I do anything to help?" The question was so sweet and determined that both adults felt their eyes welling up. "Just keep being the amazing girl you are," Ellen replied, hugging her daughter. "That's all we need." After Emily left for school, Ellen and Mark spent the morning organizing all the documents, both the evidence Ellen had kept and the information Patricia had discovered. It was like putting together a giant puzzle where each piece revealed another layer of the manipulation that Robert and Ellen's family had orchestrated. "Look at this," Mark said, comparing two dates in the documents. "Robert started negotiating the prenuptial agreement 3 months before you formalized the engagement. Which means the marriage proposal was just a show," Ellen concluded bitterly. "He was already planning everything." "And here," Mark pointed to another document, "bank transfers from his company for local political campaigns. He was buying political influence while courting you." Ellen was silent for a few minutes, reading and rereading the papers. "Mark," she finally said, "there's something I never told anyone." "What?" "The night before the wedding, when I found these documents, I overheard a conversation between Robert and my father. They were in the office, drinking whiskey and laughing." Ellen paused, as if gathering courage to continue. "Robert said that after the wedding it would be easy to convince Ellen to send the girl to a boarding school. That children interfere with business and social life." The anger Mark felt was so intense that it surprised him. The idea of someone coldly planning to separate Ellen from Emily, speaking of the girl as if she were an inconvenient obstacle. "That's why you ran away," he said. "That's why I ran. I couldn't let them do that to Emily. I couldn't let them use her to control me." That afternoon, Patricia called again, this time with even better news. "Mark, we got more information. The federal police is going to launch an operation against Robert next week. He's going to be arrested." "Arrested?" "Preventive detention. The evidence of money laundering is undeniable. And there's more. We discovered he used insider information about Ellen's family to manipulate agricultural commodity prices." "That's a federal crime. If convicted, he faces 5 to 10 years in prison." Mark hung up and immediately told Ellen everything, who listened with a mix of relief and sadness. "I should feel happy," she said, "but I just feel betrayed. My father really believed Robert would be a good husband for me." "Your father was deceived too. Robert is obviously a professional manipulator. Or my father knew and didn't care, as long as it ensured the continuity of the family empire. It was a painful possibility, but one they both knew could be true." That night, after all the children were asleep, Ellen and Mark sat on the porch, talking about the future. For the first time in weeks, there was real hope in the air. "If Robert is arrested," Ellen said, "the custody process automatically falls. And you're free to live your life." "Our life," she corrected, pulling him closer. "Mark, when all this is over, will you still want us to stay here? Even knowing there will always be complications because of my family. Ellen, I want you in my life, not despite the complications, but including them, because all of this, the struggle, the fear, the uncertainty, has only shown me how well we work together." Even with 3 kids and a crazy family in the countryside. Especially with 3 kids and a crazy family in the countryside. Ellen laughed, and it was the first time in weeks that her laughter didn't carry an underlying note of worry. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked. "Always. In my worst nightmares about losing Emily, the part that scared me the most wasn't being without her. It was imagining you 3 continuing your lives without us, as if we had never been part of this family." "Ellen," Mark said, turning to face her completely, "you and Emily are not visitors in this family. You are its center. It's us who wouldn't be able to continue without you." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Want proof?" Mark stood up, went into the house, and returned a few seconds later carrying a small navy blue velvet box. Ellen's eyes widened. "Mark, I was going to wait for all this to pass to do this right, but I realized that waiting for the right moment is an illusion." He knelt in front of her, opening the box to reveal a simple yet elegant ring. "Ellen Christina Carter, will you marry me? Officially, legally, forever?" Ellen looked at the ring, then at his determined face, then back at the ring. "Mark, are you sure? With everything that's happening, with all the uncertainties, especially because of everything that's happening. Ellen, this week taught me that I don't want to face any more crises without you by my side. I want us to be a real family, legally and officially." Ellen extended her hand, trembling slightly. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I do." When Mark slipped the ring onto her finger, Ellen began to cry, but this time it was tears of pure happiness. Inside the house, 3 children who were supposedly sleeping peeked through the living room window, smiling and whispering approving comments about what they had just witnessed. The storm was passing, and on the other side was something better than they had ever imagined. A real family, chosen and built with love, that no lawyer or investigator or sugar magnate could destroy. The future, for the first time in months, seemed bright and full of possibilities. December arrived in New York, bringing that characteristic humid heat of summer approaching, but also filled with an energy of renewal and fresh starts that seemed to permeate every conversation, every smile, every little domestic moment of the family that had solidified in the past few weeks. Robert's imprisonment had occurred during a federal police operation that made headlines in the state newspapers, with headlines about money laundering scheme in the New York agricultural sector that made Ellen feel for the first time grateful for the media exposure. The custody process had been automatically archived, and more importantly, John Carter, Ellen's father, had called for the first time since April. It was a Tuesday morning when the phone call came. Ellen was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for everyone, a ritual that had become sacred in the new family dynamic, when her cell phone rang, showing a number she recognized immediately. "Dad?" she answered, her voice laden with a mix of hope and caution that made Mark look up from the spreadsheet he was reviewing. "Ellen, my daughter." The voice on the other end sounded tired, older. Then she remembered. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About Robert. About everything. About how I let myself be fooled by someone who almost destroyed our family." Ellen sat heavily in a chair and Mark immediately moved closer, offering silent support. "Dad, Ellen, let me speak first, please." John Carter took a deep breath. "I made a terrible mistake. I believed that Robert would be good for you, for Emily, for the family business. But it was all a lie. He had been manipulating me for years." Ellen closed her eyes, feeling tears beginning to form. "I found out that Robert had been embezzling money from the company accounts for at least 2 years. He used information I shared about our business to manipulate the sugar market. And the worst—" his voice faltered for a second. "The worst is that he actually planned to send Emily to a boarding school. I found emails of him researching schools in Switzerland." "Dad." "Ellen, I almost lost my daughter and my granddaughter because of the greed of a man who never cared about our family. And now I need to know, can you forgive me?" The question hung in the air of the kitchen, and Mark saw Ellen struggle with emotions she had kept bottled up for months. "Dad, you have to understand one thing. I didn't just run away from Robert. I ran away from a life where my choices didn't matter, where Emily was seen as an obstacle, where I was treated like a pawn in a business game. I know, and I understand that now. And there's another thing. I found someone here. I fell in love. We're getting married." The silence on the other end lasted for a few eternal seconds. Is he good for you? Is he good?" Ellen looked at Mark, who was organizing the children's lunchboxes with the meticulous care he applied to all domestic tasks. "He's the first man who loves me just as I am, who adores Emily without seeing her as a problem to be solved, who has built a family with me based on respect and affection, not obligation. And Emily, how is she?" "Happy, Dad. For the first time in a long time, truly happy." "Ellen, I would like to meet this man, and I would like to see you both, if you allow me." The conversation extended for another 20 minutes, with John Carter explaining how he discovered the extent of Robert's betrayal, how he was restructuring the family business, and most importantly, how he was desperately regretful for almost losing his daughter and granddaughter by listening to a manipulator. When Ellen finally hung up, she was openly crying. "He wants to visit us," she told Mark. "Meet you, meet the kids, and he wants to apologize to me in person." "And how do you feel about that?" Scared, hopeful, confused. Ellen wiped her face with the back of her hand. "He's my father, Mark. And no matter how much he hurt me, a part of me always wanted him to understand why I ran away. And now he understands. Now he understands." John Carter's visit was scheduled for the weekend. The following preparation involved the entire family in an operation that mixed nervousness and excitement. Peter, who had developed a natural curiosity about grandfathers since he discovered that Emily was going to have one, was particularly excited. "Is he going to be my grandpa too?" he asked during Thursday's dinner. "Well, Ellen said carefully. "He's going to be Emily's grandpa, and since you two are siblings now, then yes," Peter concluded with the irrefutable logic of a 7-year-old. "I'm going to have a grandpa who has a family farm." Isabella, now almost 15 and having developed a sophisticated understanding of complex family dynamics, asked the question everyone was thinking but no one had verbalized. "What if he doesn't like us?" "Isa," Mark said gently, "he doesn't need to like us for us to like ourselves. We're a good family that works well together. If he recognizes that, great. If he doesn't, that's his problem, not ours." "But it would be easier if he liked us," Peter observed, with the straightforward honesty of children. "It would," Ellen agreed, "and I think he will like you. You are impossible not to love." John Carter arrived on Saturday afternoon driving a silver Ford pickup, a vehicle choice that immediately reassured Mark with its simplicity. It wasn't the kind of ostentation that had characterized Robert's visit. When Ellen opened the door, father and daughter looked at each other for a few seconds before embracing with an emotion that made all observers feel a tightness in their chests. "Daddy," Ellen murmured against his chest, and for the first time since Mark had known her, she seemed like a daughter, not just an independent woman. "My daughter," John Carter replied, his voice choked. "How I've missed you." John Carter was a man in his 60s, with completely white hair but still a strong posture, wearing clean jeans and a blue plaid shirt that made him look exactly what he was. A successful farmer, but a farmer above all. There was none of the business arrogance that Mark had expected. "This must be Mark," he said, extending his hand with a firm handshake but without trying to prove anything. "Mr. John Carter, it's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is mine, and please call me John. If you are going to marry my daughter, we are family." Emily, who had been shy behind her mother during the initial greetings, finally approached. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. John Carter knelt down to her level, and Mark saw tears welling up in the older man's eyes. "Hi, my granddaughter. Wow, how you've grown, and how beautiful you are." "Thank you. Mommy said you have a farm with horses." "I do, and when you come to visit me, you will be able to ride them." "Really? Really?" Peter, unable to contain his curiosity any longer, stepped forward too. "Are you the grandpa of Sugar?" John Carter laughed, a genuine laugh that immediately relaxed all the tension in the room. "I am, and you must be Peter. Ellen has told me a lot about you." "She talked about me?" "She did. She said you are brave and smart and that you take very good care of Emily when you play together." Peter smiled proudly, and Mark noticed that John Carter had instinctively known exactly what to say to win the boy over. The bar. Lunch was a revelation. John Carter shared stories from the farm that made the children laugh, asked genuine questions about school, hobbies, and each one's dreams. But mostly, he observed, Mark realized that the man was carefully assessing the family dynamics, how Ellen and Mark interacted, how the children related to each other, how everyone functioned as a unit. "Mark," John Carter said during dessert, "Ellen told me that you work in financial consulting." "Yes, sir. I help small and medium-sized businesses organize their finances." "It's an important job, especially in the United States, where so many entrepreneurs lack proper financial education." "That's exactly what I think." "And do you feel prepared for the complexity of marrying an heiress?" The question was direct, but asked without a challenging tone. "Mr. John, I fell in love with Ellen before I knew about the inheritance, and I fell in love with the person she is when she is away from all the family pressures. If she decides to never have contact with the inheritance, I will continue to love her just the same. And if she decides to get involved with the family business, I will support her in any decision that makes her happy." John Carter nodded slowly. "Ellen chose well." In the afternoon, while the children showed John Carter the small backyard where they had created a makeshift garden, Ellen and Mark stayed in the kitchen preparing coffee. "He likes you," Ellen said, smiling as she watched through the window, her father being dragged by Peter to see the compost bin they had built with crates. "He's different from what I expected." "How so?" "More human, less business mogul, more concerned father." Robert's imprisonment changed him. "I think he finally understood that money and power mean nothing if you lose the people you love." That night, after the children went to bed and the three adults sat on the porch talking, John Carter made a proposal that none of them had anticipated. "Ellen," he said, stirring the coffee that Mark had served, "I want to propose something to you." "What?" "Come back to the farm. Not to live. I know your life is here now, but come work with me. Help me restructure the business. Bring Mark along if he wants. The company needs someone with solid financial knowledge." Ellen looked at Mark, who made "the decision is yours" expression. "Dad, I don't know if—" "Ellen, you've always been smarter about business than I wanted to admit. And now, with Robert out of the picture, I need someone I can trust completely. And Emily? And the other children?" "Emily is my granddaughter, Isabella and Peter." John Carter hesitated, then she smiled. "Well, if you two are getting married, they are my grandchildren too, aren't they?" The proposal sparked a discussion that stretched late into the night, involving travel logistics, the children's education, and how to balance life in New York with responsibilities in the countryside. But beneath all the practical considerations, there was a current of hope, the possibility that Ellen could have both the family she had chosen and reconciliation with her birth family. "You don't have to decide now," John Carter finally said. "But think about it. The family farm is big enough for everyone, and it would be nice to have the family together again." 2 months later, on a February morning when New York was being punished by one of those relentless summers that made everyone dream of air conditioning, Ellen and Mark got married in a simple ceremony at the local courthouse, followed by a backyard party. The event was small but perfect. Neighborhood friends, Mark's co-workers, the children's teachers, and John Carter, who had become a constant presence in their lives, traveling from San Jose every 2 weeks for Sunday lunches that had become tradition. Peter was the official ring-bearer, a responsibility he took so seriously that he practiced the walk through the living room dozens of times. Isabella and Emily were the bridesmaids, wearing light blue dresses they had chosen themselves on a shopping trip that became one of the most important bonding moments between the two girls. But the most emotional moment of the ceremony happened when the courthouse official asked if there were any special statements to be made, and Emily raised her little hand. "May I speak?" she asked. "Of course, sweetheart," Ellen replied, curious. "I wanted to say that Mark is going to be the best dad in the world, and that now we are all a real family forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The backyard party was exactly as Ellen had dreamed. Homemade chocolate truffles served on simple plates, music playing on the radio, kids running between the tables, adults chatting and laughing freely. It was the complete opposite of the 300-guest wedding that had been planned with Robert. It was real, genuine, full of love. "So," Mark said to Ellen during their first dance, a slow waltz in the middle of the backyard decorated with Christmas lights, "how do you feel being officially a Santos?" "Complete," Ellen replied without hesitation. "For the first time in my life, completely whole." "And what about your father's proposal? Have you decided?" Ellen looked around at the party. John Carter animatedly chatting with neighbors about composting techniques, Peter teaching a school friend how to make paper airplanes, Isabella and Emily organizing a musical chairs game for the younger kids. "I think so. I think it's time to go home. Not to the life they expected me to live, but to help build something new." Are you sure? I am, especially because I know that no matter where we are, New York, the family farm, anywhere, we will be together. Mark twirled her in the dance, and when she returned to his arms, they were both smiling with the certainty of people who had found exactly what they were looking for, even without knowing they were searching. 6 months later, the Santos family had settled into a routine that blended city and countryside in a way that worked surprisingly well. During the week, they stayed in New York. Mark maintained his consulting business, now with several agribusiness clients. Ellen was pursuing an executive MBA. The kids continued at the same schools. On weekends and holidays, they went to the family farm, where Ellen gradually took on more responsibilities in managing the family business. The house in Brooklyn remained the emotional center of the family. It was where homework happened, important conversations took place, and dinners stretched late, with John Carter sharing stories from Ellen's childhood that made Emily laugh until her stomach hurt. One of those nights, when the kids finally went to sleep, and the 3 adults stayed on the porch, watching the barely visible stars through the city's light pollution, Ellen made an observation that perfectly summarized how their lives had transformed. "You know what? I remember when I came to borrow sugar that April morning. I was so desperate, so lost. I thought I was running away from my life." "And you were," Mark said, pulling her closer. "No. I was running towards my real life. I just didn't know it yet." John Carter smiled, stirring his sweetened coffee with the crystal sugar he now brought as a gift every visit. "Ellen, your mother used to say that sugar only sweetens when it completely dissolves into what is being prepared. I think that's what happened here. You all dissolved into each other in a way that created something completely new and sweet." "Dad, that was almost poetic," Ellen laughed. "Blame it on age. I'm getting sentimental." That night, after John Carter went to the guest room that had officially become his when he was in New York, Ellen and Mark were left alone on the porch. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliciously happy," she replied. "And you?" "Me? I got the family I always dreamed of having, the woman I never thought I deserved, and 3 kids who make me want to be a better man every day." "3 kids?" "Peter, Isabella, Emily. They are all my kids now. Officially." Ellen smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know what's even more amazing? It all started with borrowed sugar on a rainy morning, and ended with real sugar, the kind that lasts forever." Inside the house, 3 kids slept peacefully, dreaming of weekends at the family farm, Sunday chocolate truffles, and the security of a family that had formed organically through affection, mutual need, and the courage of 2 people who chose to build something. It was new together. It was exactly how it should be, sweet, genuine, and built to last.